Good evening, everybody. I'm not used to going live on YouTube. I know you said Facebook there. I am used to going live on Facebook. So I'm having a little chat in the chat box already with Joanne and Michelle and Kirsty. So do come on and say hello, and then we will crack straight on. But if you, as far as I know with YouTube, if you're a subscriber to YouTube and it doesn't have to be this channel as well, then your name will appear on the chat. So do have a look at that. If you can work out how to chat to me, I would love to see your comments. So the reason I'm doing this tonight, total transparency here, is I am running some training starting tomorrow that is just perfect for anybody who wants to improve how their children learn number bonds and lots more besides. And I thought, as the doors close at 9 o'clock tonight, I'm just going to do one last come on and show you what's on offer and do a little bit of teaching. When I've got my big board out like this, people know I'm in business. And if you've not met me before, we can meet and you can think, do I want to spend some more time with this person or not? So you may know me really well already. And if you just want to come and get to know me and EY Maths better, then this YouTube channel is the perfect place to do this. But I'm specifically going to talk about number bonds. I've got a little story to tell you, which I really hope you can relate to. So I look forward to your comments in the box about this. But what I want to start off with, we are a really international community in EY Maths. We literally come from every inhabited continent, a lot, across the world. So not everybody, of course, is using the foundation stage curriculum, which is actually only England as well that is applicable to, not the rest of the UK. But many, many people use it as a reference, and what's in it isn't atypical of what's in curricula in other parts of the world. So don't feel that if I talk about the English foundation stage curriculum, you won't hear me talk about that very much, because what I am about is children learning maths really well all over the world. And the way that children learn maths really well is not by us being given activities to do with our children. It's by us being invested in. So what I do a lot of, it's a bit like an iceberg, rather than just the what, which is what are the activities, what's the fun stuff, which we all hear about, people asking about this. It's why do children need to know this stuff? How do they learn best? And then what? So I hope that makes sense. And if you know me well, you'll know these are messages that I use all the time. So in England and in other similar parts of the world, in about June, suddenly all over Facebook, we get the same sorts of comments and questions, mainly questions along the lines of, my children can't recall their number bonds to 10, as in the pairs of numbers that make 10 in total. What do I do? Anybody got any fun activities? And people are panicking because depending on where you are in the world, we have some form of assessment, and the children are going to be measured about how much progress they've made. And at the end of the day, if the children are going to be measured, really it's you that's being measured, isn't it? And you're there and you're thinking, holy whatever. These kids, if you are in as I say, in England, and you're teaching 4 and 5-year-olds with what we call reception age, around the world that we call different things. But you're thinking, I'm going to pass these children on and someone's going to say they don't know the stuff they need to know. Now, I'm going to say that it's really good news that it's February and not June, okay? And that a big message from me is always, you must start with the destination in mind. And the trouble is, what we're seeing, completely understandably, what we're seeing as the destination is my kids need to learn number bonds and instantly recall them. So I'm going to basically get them to start recalling them instantly. And I'm going to work on that for most of a year and see what happens, see if it goes in and they can then, regurgitate it. That isn't the destination. The destination is that they, in my opinion, the destination is that they understand why they need these things, and these things make sense to them, and therefore the brain operates in a completely different way. Because if you teach someone to try and just recall something, basically this is what's happening in the brain. You're saying this, and you want them to say this, and you're building this linear pathway in the brain. When you teach with understanding, I'll change pens, not for effect, just because my pen's not very good. When you teach for understanding, you create a network of connections. Something, it's not going to look as geometric as this in the brain, but kind of, so think spider webs and things like that. And of course, and what's happening is the brain connects existing knowledge with new knowledge, and all of this fires off. And that's why when someone asks you a question about what did you do yesterday, and you go, oh, I don't know. And then they say, well, you remember we were eating that thing, or we heard that thing, or we were with that person, and your brain goes, oh, yeah, that person. Oh, I remember that. And your brain starts firing off. That's because it's done this. Yeah. It's not just trying to remember one way. And the other thing, I'm just going to find something to rub that off with. The other thing is when your brain cares, when your brain sees the point, it just learns things really easily. So I'm going to say that number bonds, the first thing we're getting wrong, and I'm going to tell you my story. The first thing we're getting wrong is we think, oh my goodness, it says they've got to instantly recall these number bonds. So that's what I'm going to get them to do loads and loads and loads. And the weird thing is, year in, year out, we see people talking about it's not working. My kids can't remember this, and we still do it. And my theory can only be we don't have another way of doing it. So that's what I'm going to help you with tonight and tell you a little bit about what you do need to do. So my story is I taught a class of year one children. So in England, that is 5 and 6 year olds. And this was many years ago now, a couple of decades ago. And I was basically, when you teach year one, certainly back 20 years ago, you taught number bonds to 10, and you just seemed to be teaching it like all day, every day. And the kids that didn't get it as well, you'd send them out with the teaching assistant and be like, still work on these number bonds to 10. These kids haven't got it, these poor kids. And we do so much of pairs of numbers. We're like, oh, this number has this number as a friend. So the friend of 8 is 2, and that they really like each other and they go together. And then we'd be like hold this number in your head and then attach it to this number. And we'd get cards and we match up cards. And we do as many different ways as we possibly could, because, we would use IT to do it, to make it fun. But you know what we were doing? We were trying to teach our children to pair up 2 digits. And that's where we were fundamentally going wrong. Now, the other bit of the story is a few years later, I taught year 4. And unfortunately for me, it was the same group of children that I taught in year 1. Now, typically what used to happen the whole time I've been a teacher, and I've taught every year group, is picture the scene in the staff room. Year 5 or 6 teacher walks in, teacher of 9, 10, 11 year olds. Year 1 teacher is sitting behind the door. They don't see them when they walk in. They walk in, they go, oh, I've just had the most awful lesson with my kids. We're just trying to do some basic addition, and none of them know their bonds of 10. Can you believe they don't know their facts, and they literally can't do a thing with it? And the year 6 teacher says, yeah, we've been trying to move into decimals and they can't work with bonds of 10. This is, what on earth have those teachers been doing with them further down the school? Implication, if not said. And then, of course, they clock the year 1 teacher sitting there, and the year 1 teacher says, literally, that's all we did in year 1 was teach number bonds. And the funny thing was, which wasn't funny at all, was I got to year 4 and the majority of these children could not recall their number bonds to 10. We'd be doing something like 117 plus 6, and they'd all be going 118, 119, 120, and so forth, and counting in ones, no sense of where the 3 to get them to the 20 would be. And we're like, jump to the next 10. And they're like, what are you talking about? And even in some much more simple examples, it was devastating. And instead of me being able to blame someone, I could only blame myself. And I have to say that was one of the pivotal points in my teaching career where I decided that I needed to understand this very differently, because I did not want this to happen again, because I was responsible. I put all the effort in, all the time in. I taught them and taught them and taught them. And when I got sick of teaching them, my teaching assistant had taught them and taught them. And most of them had not learned anything. And maybe some of them could recall them, but they didn't know why they were recalling them. So if you can relate to any of this, in the painful way. It's like, it doesn't work, yeah? So we need to do it differently. So I was thinking today, what's a good example? Because I am the analogy queen. What's a good example of why this doesn't work? And I've come up with an example. See if you like this. Okay, mixing colors. So you can help me out here depending on how fast you can type in the chat box. Okay, so red plus yellow when you're mixing colors equals what? I'm going to run out of board, so you're just going to have to tell me there. I'm going to move along a little bit like this. And then we've got blue plus yellow equals what? And red plus blue equals what? Now, this is quite good because I do maths, obviously, for a job now, and I did an art degree. So this kind of like, it's just perfect scenario for me. So I'm looking there. So red plus yellow, we know, equals orange. I don't know if that's going to fit on my board so you can see it, or it doesn't. You know it's there. Blue plus yellow equals green, and red plus blue equals purple. Okay, now that's all true, but I have to say, if I was asked to memorize all that, I probably would mix up which colors I had to add and probably mix up which color it equaled. And I have to say, I couldn't have cared less. If someone just wanted me to memorize all this, the main thing in my head would be, who cares? Which I have to say is most of my secondary school education summed up. You know, people said, like, you know, what's the value of the X? And you're like, seriously, couldn't care less. When is it break time? So are we able to see that that is not a good way of learning how to mix colors? Is everyone in agreement with that? When you use examples like this, you can use these with when you're talking to parents, when you're talking to other staff. Okay, I'll leave that up actually. That's what I'm going to call in mathematics, because I used to, before COVID, I wasn't just an early years consultant. I taught teachers who teach early years all the way through primary school to 11 years old and into secondary, and sometimes even to A-level. So the majority of my work was primary and early years, but this stuff then, you know, the reason why I'm so passionate about my early years is because of the impact it has on children later on. So something we used to talk about a lot was concrete pictorial abstract from Jerome Bruner. So that is abstract because it is writing. Okay, there's not actually any, you've got to attach meaning to that for it to mean anything. Right, here is my pictorial version. Wonder if you can guess what I'm going to show you. I hope you can see how much preparation I put into this session today. Unfortunately, everyone, I couldn't normally have done this, but I just took delivery of some fantastic coloured whiteboard pens yesterday, so I'm very excited. Can you see the difference between that example and that example? So, of course, you could write the words in the colours, but actually that reminds me of that one where you write like the word blue in green, or you write the word blue in yellow and it completely blows your mind. So here instead, that a blue plus red equals purple, and blue plus yellow equals green, and red plus yellow equals orange. So this is my pictorial version. This is, for me, much easier, and I'm sure it is for you, to comprehend. And I'll say at this point, linking this with science, can you picture in your mind, if I ask you to picture what the cockpit of an aeroplane might look like, you might not know that in any great detail, but we've all seen films. Most of the information on the cockpit of an aeroplane is not in digits, even though it's all readings. It is almost all dials and, you know, things that measurements, things like the level might be lines and other pictorial images that you can imagine. It might be colors, something changing from one color to another. And the reason that even today in 2023, the cockpit of an aeroplane is covered in diagrams, as it were, and symbols and, as I say, things like, what would you call them? Things like, I say, dials and so forth, is because the human brain can comprehend a picture much more easily than something it has to translate into a picture. So when you write digits or write words, the human brain has to think, what does that mean? And if you're flying a plane, that's an extra decision you don't want the pilot to have to make, especially in an emergency. You want the pilot to be able to glance at the screens and see exactly whether they've got enough fuel and exactly what the temperature is and exactly how level they are. And the brain, of course, when it sees images, doesn't have to work very hard to do it. So that's why pictorial makes more sense. However, I'm going to look in the chat box here. So I don't know how long the delay is. There's a delay between me talking and you typing. So type as fast as you can here. Do you think this is a good way of learning how to mix colors, or do you think there's a better way? So I'm just going to wait and have a little drink here and see. I'm going to catch up on what's in the chat. I've got lots of people I know on this call tonight, which is lovely. So Nikki says concrete hands-on approach. So Nikki, say that in an even more everyday way. Literally tell me, everybody, what would you want to do to understand this? Because, you know, you may or may not have done this. I think most people will have done. So actually mix it yourself, says Liz. Kirsty says these are both members of my EY Maths community and Impact. Paint, physically make the colors. So when children encounter this the first time, or if adults are doing it, the minute you have a little bit of paint still on your paintbrush and you change colors, you start painting and you think, I didn't want orange, I wanted yellow. And then you realize you had a bit of red on your brush, which is why it changed the color. And children, of course, experiment with this. So then we start thinking, oh, well, what would happen if I did this? And of course, we quickly discover if we mix lots of colors, we get this kind of muddy brown, which is quite useful as well. So you begin to understand that you have some control over here. You see the magic of the science happening. You experience this. You then realize that if you want to paint something, there is a reason to want orange. There's a reason to want green. And there isn't just one color green. There isn't just one type of orange, which is another reason why I never use ready mix paint, I have to say. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't, but if you use the primary colors, children realize so much more about this. At that point, which I'm going to say exactly as Nikki said, that's what you'd call the concrete experience. Concrete, you have to hold it in your hands. And we say that children have to hold learning in their hands before they can hold it in their heads. And it's the same with adults. And children are like adults. You couldn't really care less about stuff you haven't, as it were, held in your hands. And you don't, of course, literally hold everything, but experiencing it is what we're talking about. So you've got the concrete experience. And then if I say, to help us remember this, let's jot down what it is we've learned. You can see that this would have a role, and it's really easy for the human brain to comprehend. And then finally, if you really wanted to, of course, maybe you'd say these rather than write them, because I'm not sure in this situation personally that there's any role to write these, but I could imagine, of course, saying them. I'm attaching words, and that's just in English. It's not, obviously, again, it's a really nice thing we talk about a lot, that the words we use, for example, number names, 2 and 3 and 7, when I'm speaking like that, I'm just speaking in English, whereas the symbols of 2 and 3 and 7 are universal, but they have different names. So therefore, the name mustn't be that important. So that's, again, something we're going to have a look at in the challenge we do together. Does that make sense, everyone? Does my analogy there begin to help us understand why it is an absolute nonsense to think that what we want children to do is say that, you know, we want 2 + 8 and we want 5 + 5, because that is the equivalent of what I just did when I wrote them out. But do we want children to know about these relationships? Yes. And what I said about the painting was, so they've got to care. They've got to see the point. They've got to hold it in their hands. So what does this look like held in our hands is what we're going to just touch on here. One thing I will show before I go, honestly, I did this so much. So I want to see if I know I'm not the only one, because I've seen it so much as a consultant. But we would do this and we'd start them off here. I mean, I'm talking about, as I say, over 25 years career here. We do, right, we've got 0 + 10, and we've got 1 + 9. And of course, this could be bonds of 5 as well. And we've got 2 + 8. And then the children are sent off. This is usually at year 1. And they're sent off to fill it in. Now, the kids are not stupid. They're not stupid at all. And some of them straight away spot there's a pattern. So maybe the teacher's gone even one stage further. There's no explanation as to why this works at all. And of course, the kids are already learning in year 1. We just do what we're told in maths. We don't expect it to make sense. We don't expect it to be interesting. We just want to get it right. All those things that are devastating for progress. So there are kids who spot this, and what they do is they just do this and so forth. And then they start going 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, like this. Now, there are kids who don't spot the pattern, but they do spot the kids who did spot the pattern, and they copy what they're doing. So they're getting like second-hand learning. And you know that they've done it as well because the add signs start off quite neat, and then they end up like this. Because they basically filled in that side, and filled out that side. And then they might get it ticked. I mean, I must say, I'm hoping things are a lot more interactive now, but there'll be a version of this still happening, probably from a scheme. So can anybody relate to this absolute nonsense? And don't feel bad if you're part of the nonsense, because every story I'm telling you, the only reason I can tell you it is because I did it myself for decades until I thought, hang on, these kids are getting to me in year 4 and they haven't got a flipping clue. And then I hear those colleagues I still work with now in secondary school saying it's devastating watching these children. So I was like, there must be a better way. So does all this make sense, everyone? Yeah, so as I say, and I want some, there are some little reactions. So if you are empathizing with my stories, let me know. Okay, so what I'm going to say to you tonight that's so important is the tools you need in your toolbox are to understand how do we get this to make sense? How do we make it so they care? How do we want to make it fun and interesting, because we do want to get that fluency of you understand why we're learning it, you get it, yeah, but to get that fluency, that's when we have to, work on that tool. That's exactly the same with things like times tables. In fact, I should have mentioned that earlier. It's exactly like times tables. Times tables taught really badly are when children are just taught to chant and just say them. We want them to get to that, to be able to say those facts fluently. The way they get to them is by learning them through the understanding of the maths and the understanding of the application in real life. It's exactly the same. I'm doing some work on that with some teachers in Jersey in a couple of weeks. So Key Stage 2, by the way, not early years. So what I want to show you tonight then, just very briefly, is this idea about where do number bonds come from? What's the maths? Okay, and this is the beginning of the journey that I am going to take you on in the challenge, as I say, that closes tonight at 9 o'clock. I'll give you some more details before we finish, but I will take you on this journey and give you this and so much more. So the idea that we need to start with what we call perceptual subitizing, which many of you on the call here, you could literally do this in your sleep. But the idea that humans can see that this is more than this, and young children, babies can see this, that they don't have a label for it yet. In time, they learn to label this using whatever their first language is. So I'm going to say 2 and I'm going to say 1. And the number bond bit comes in when we move on from perceptual subitizing to what's called conceptual subitizing. And that's much more complicated. So I'm going to say that I'm a child who recognizes 2 and I recognize 1. So if I dropped a load of counters, maybe I'm saying, oh, there's a 2 and there's a 1 and there's a 1 and there's a 2. And someone else might say, oh, there's a 2 and there's a 2 and there's a 2. So we do loads and loads of stuff like that, which many of you have done hours and hours of work with me, and you're brilliant in the class, excuse me, with your children. But then what happens is we do what we call move it to prove it, where I might say, do you know what? In this number here, I can see a 2 and a 1. And you can pull that 2 and a 1 out in different ways as well, which when you think about the skills needed for counting, we have what we call order irrelevance, which means it doesn't matter which ones you count. And this is really helpful in that, because it doesn't matter which 2 and 1 I pull out. The 2 and 1's still there. And then I know as a child that this amount isn't 1 because 1 looks like that. And it isn't 2 because 2 looks like that. It's another number. So in time, I learned to call this 3. And what we then say is, look, there's a 2 and a 1 in the 3. Move it to prove it. There's also a 1 and a 1 and a 1 in a 3, because that's not number bonds, that's number facts. Bonds are when there's 2 of them, but you need your number facts as well, because when we get into division, you're going to need to split that number into more than just 2 ways. But what starts to happen then, let's change things this time, because I use all sorts of different things. So here's some washers that I've stuck magnetic tape to. Maybe we drop these from a height and they land like that. In time, what happens is your children can say, well, there's 3. And you say, well, how either how did you know there was 3? What I'm trying to do is wean myself off there and say, what did you see? And they say, well, I saw the 2 and the 1, and I know there's a 2 and a 1 and 3. And you could even, of course, it doesn't change the amount, but it might be easy to prove it by doing that. Or they might say, I can see a 2 and a 1, and I know that's 3 because of the 2 and a 1. So you can say either way. I can see the 3 because I knew the 2 and the 1, or I can see the 2 and the 1, and I knew that was 3. What about then if I have another one here, and they might say, well, there's a 2 there, and there's a 1 there, and there's a 1 there. So we could, again, there's lots of work we're going to do on how to know how many that is without counting them, because subitizing, which is knowing how many without counting, is what gives you the basis of all that addition and subtraction. So if we look here and we said, for example, move it to prove it, I've got a 2 and a 2. Move it to prove it, I've got a 3 and a 1, because I'm recognizing the whole amount. We could split it into more than 2 groups, but we could say to the children, we're just going to split it into 2 groups, or we're going to split it into more than 2 groups, because at the beginning, we don't want to limit the way they're looking at it. We want to open that up, and then we can get to the point where we just look at two amounts. So we've got maybe all of them over there, 4 and none. And we're doing it like this. Now, the other thing we can add into the equation then, which we're going to do on our training next week, is the wonderful thing that is a 5 frame. And one of the biggest bits of feedback I get from this challenge is people saying, I either didn't know a 5 frame existed, I didn't understand why a 5 frame was important. I might have 5 frames in my classroom, but I didn't know how to use them. And most people, and pretty much all schemes, as far as I've seen, go straight to a 10 frame, which is 2 5s. Now, it's so important when you are older as a child, when you start dealing with more complicated numbers, and particularly decimals, being able to understand the 2 5s within the 10 is transformative when it comes to your calculation. And I might give you a quick example if we've got time. But some of you in the group that are watching, you know that 5 frames are massive game changers. But let's have a look at it with number bonds in mind. Let's switch what I'm using again. So we talk about cognitive load and keeping cognitive load very low. These are much more interesting, which means the cognitive load has been raised. But what I've done is to make them a little bit less interesting is I've got same color, similar size. Well, it's similar color, isn't it? Similar size, similar color, similar shape. These are Tagua nuts, by the way. These are an ethically sourced nut from a South American tree. They're so gorgeous. So they probably will disappear from your settings within a day because the children will love them so much. But what we can do is what we look at in the training and all the work I do is we learn, for example, to look at what 1 looks like on a 5 frame. And when 1's on a 5 frame, you may not know how many this is yet at the beginning of your journey, but you know that it's not full. There's a lot of spaces still. So then we have a look, and I'm doing this on the training with you, this 1 to 10 training. I've got a video to show you this. We look at what does 2 look like. And you think 2 fills up a bit more space. And also, can you see, you can still see the 2 1s in the 2. So basically number bonds to 5 are what is not on there yet, that if it was there, this would be full. And this numbers within numbers idea. So let's have a look at what 3 looks like. So let's use the one that's even more similar. So they've learned 3 off the 5 frame. We don't stop looking at things off the 5 frame because in real life, things rarely arrange themselves like this. This is a mathematical image that we're using to help us. So we put these on here. And what starts to happen at this point, and lots of you have done self-registration with me, if you're a Pathway member or an Impact member, all of this is on my website. You've got that self-registration training in your libraries. And the idea that the children put their faces on these 5 frames, and they quickly, you don't need to tell them, they'll say things like, there's not much space left, or they might hold up 2 fingers, or even like this, or they might, if it's children's faces, they have that awareness that there's only space for 2 more children. So if there's 3 children's photographs and 3 children waiting to put theirs on, you sometimes get this kind of nervousness from the children, particularly if we get to this stage and there's 2 children waiting. You get 3 roles, and there's lots and lots of my members on the group tonight who will say this is exactly what their 3-year-olds are doing. And even if there's no shared language between you yet, or they're not talking yet, they'll kind of get ooh, because they know that 2 won't fit on there, only 1 will fit on there. So they're developing all of this understanding way before the words. they're developing this motivation of like, well, there's this many and there's now only space for this many. And in time, the reason to talk about that amount and say, well, we've got 4, there's only space for 1 more. Can you see that that is the conduit to saying that what goes with 4 to fill a 5 frame and therefore gives you 5. And in time, as I say, we become more and more fluent with this, that it's a 4 and a 1 together that are giving us the 5. It's a 3 and a 2 that are giving us the 5. And when you start on this journey in nursery, which is 3 to 4 for our, it's actually 0 to 4 in many cases. But if we look at our nursery, that are 3 to 4, if you start there and you've got 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, the journey is amazing. If you're in with 4 and 5-year-olds now, don't panic. The great thing is, it's like the older you get, the more capable you are of learning these things more quickly. It's about your knowledge and the experiences, and you're giving them this from all different sides. So there are many, many more activities that I can give you, where what we do, if I just show you a few examples that I've got on the table in front of me without breaking things, is I do introduce, you can see I've been playing, just making it look pretty, but I've got my 10 frames, do lots of things on 10 frames as well. We've got things like this, cards, so that children, this is really nice. So things like, let me show you, for example, this number. So even before they know what that number is, they start to see that as the one where there's 2 missing. And it doesn't matter which way up it is either. So it's the idea that they're all together is really important. And we'll talk about that on the training. Don't spread your 8 out all over the 10 frame. There's training on that on this YouTube channel for free for you. But when they start to learn to label this 8, I play games where I sprinkle them like all over the floor, and they have to go and collect a set of numbers, say 1 to 10. And they'll say things like, we need an 8, we need an 8. And their partner's saying, what does it look like? It's like, it's the one with 2 missing. Can you hear? That's them talking about number bonds. And we look at the 8 pattern in using the 2s, which is what Numicon uses as well. And we also look at the 8 pattern where you have a full 5 and 3 of the next 5, because depending on what you're calculating, those 2 images are so helpful. So I'm going to finish by showing an example of how understanding the 2 5s can really help you as an adult as well. Tell me in the chat box who watches Strictly when it's on. You either watch it through choice or you're forced to watch it. Just pop a thumbs up or a heart or a smiley face or some form of indication that I'm not the only one who likes it when Strictly's on. Okay, so let's just have a look. We'll change things again. My counters are looking a little bit sad. And I know an 8 is where there's 2 missing. I certainly don't need to count. Never count on a 10 frame, everybody. Very, very important. Not because Karen says, but because it defeats the whole point of a 10 frame. So there is one way of looking at 8 on a 10 frame, a full 5 and 3 of the next 5. And I could take them all off and I could have filled them like this. And that is the other way. I'm only moving it just because of time tonight. If it was the children, I'd take them all off and I'd build it with the 2s. Let's have a look. Anybody mentioning Strictly? I'm so late. I will catch up. Is it on Pathway? It's on the YouTube channel, Joe. Don't worry. It'll be recorded. As long as you just go to the live bit, okay? Because that's where it puts it. Teslin says, can we use the number track to prove it for kids who love counting? Kids who love counting need to see that as a tool. This is what we do a lot in the training, and Teslin's in my greater impact, my highest level, but Teslin's quite new. We need them to understand that it's the times when you use counting. So for example, and I'm skipping ahead here for a lot of you because you haven't done any training with me yet, counting is great for when something is moving. So if cars were passing you, or if you were thinking about musical notes that you can hear, understanding subitizing will mean your children then understand counting. The hardest thing about counting is learning that the last digit in the count represents the set. And when children can subitize well, that makes complete sense. So children who love counting, they're counting, but they're not developing a sense of number. If they learn to count when they've got very good subitizing skills, they will do it with a sense of number. So Teslin, we've got quite a big journey to go on there, but this coming week together will really help with that. Okay, brilliant. Liz Patterson from Northumberland in my Greater Impact group. She's got some lovely moves going there. I can just imagine Liz doing that. All right, so the reason I mentioned strictly, let's have a look at the scores, everybody. We'll have Craig, got 4 scores. Craig's never very generous. He had a bit of a funny turn this year or last year and was a bit more generous. But let's say that these are the 4 scores, okay? And what I want you to do is, even if you know your 7 times table and you've got a wave, you could, of course, do 4 7s and subtract 1. You might do 4 6s and add 3 and so forth. There's loads of ways of doing this. But what I want you to do is think about the fact, and we'll finish on this tonight, that 6 is a 5 and a 1, and 7 is a 5 and a 2. So just pop in the chat box for me. Picture that as 5 and 1, 5 and 2, 5 and 2, and 5 and 2. When you add up the 5s, because 5s are really easy to add up because these 2 5s create a 10 and these 2 5s create a 10. So think about what you created there. And if you learn, when we do this together, what happens is you stop looking at the digits and you start picturing the 10 frames. So you think, well, I've got those 4 5s, so that's 20. And I've got a 2, a 2, a 2, and a 1. And your children will have learned, believe me, 2, a 2, a 2, and a 1 gives you 7. So it's going to be 27. And this stuff, I've got Nicole on the call tonight who is over in Jersey where I'm going. And she's heard me say this recently. I was talking to the maths advisor for Jersey, Andy Parkinson, who has got a maths degree. And he said, your training should come with a warning, Karen. And I was a bit like, oh no, getting instantly paranoid. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I've got a maths degree. And now when I'm calculating with numbers, I see 10 frames. I've completely changed how I mentally calculate. He said, I used to be doing column methods in my head. And a column method, of course, is meant for written maths. It was never meant for mental maths. And to hear somebody of that level of attainment and that level of proficiency in maths saying that, it is really exciting stuff, everyone. It's really, really important. So let's have a look. Anything? Okay. If you've got questions, everyone, because I'm going to pop off in a minute now. If you've got questions and you're new to me, the place to go is we have got a Facebook group, which is called, which is EY Maths 3 to 5. Just be aware I'm thinking of changing something there. So get in there quick because you'll need to know what's going to happen if it changes. But what I'm going to leave you with, and the reason I'm on tonight, is at 9 o'clock, which by my reckoning is about 53 minutes time, the doors to the challenge to come and work with me to do this are closing. And every time we get people, tomorrow is just full of, oh, I've just found out about the challenge and I really, really want to join it. And we're like, no, the doors are closed because it doesn't serve the members who've come in on time well to have latecomers. That's the reason. I've tried it all different ways. So if you want to join our challenge, you're going to get so much from me live like this. You're going to get your videos. You can go and find out about this on the website. You don't need me to explain all this. But I'm offering you the chance to come and work with me. And it's £14. £14. I charge hundreds of pounds for people to come and work with me, and particularly live, because that's what I do for a living. So I can't show you my screen, but you just need to head over to www.eymaths.co.uk. Let me write it up here. Because I don't mind if you decide not to join for whatever reason, but I do mind if you didn't know it was happening and you didn't know what was on offer. I'll do this underneath, because that would be devastating to me, because all I'm interested in my job, and the reason there are so many of my members, so my Pathway Impact and Greater Impact members on this call tonight, is because what we do works so well and we make such a difference. But you know what? We make a difference to your life primarily. You just suddenly have this amazing toolbox, great levels of self-confidence, loving what you're doing. And when you know what you are doing, you will teach so differently. And instead of feeling like, oh, I've got to do it like this. And everything we do is like the roots of a tree. I'll finish on this, just show you if I take this out of the way. Because someone asked me about this yesterday. I was training a school in Dubai yesterday, and I'm off to Dubai in May as a keynote at their conference as well, which is very exciting. So if you imagine a tree like this is what I drew for the school yesterday. So there's the tree and there's all the branches. This is also my website. Here's your roots. What I'm going to give you and what I give everyone I work with is I give you the subject knowledge you need and the pedagogical knowledge you need. So this is understanding the maths, and this is understanding how children learn the maths. So if you use White Rose, if you've heard of that, if you use Maths No Problem, if you use Power Maths, if you're working with the NCETM, if you are in Australia or New Zealand or one of the in the Americas or Canada or what, it doesn't matter what you use, because this, by strengthening this, it will allow you to use whatever tends to be not your choice. It tends to be imposed upon you. You will use it so much better. And what we call that is you move from being a follower of something to being a user. So anybody who wants to join, who hasn't, anyone who you're thinking of and you're thinking, do you know what, I need to tell these people about this, you've now got 49 minutes to join me, because at 9 o'clock an alarm goes off and I'm closing the doors. And then tomorrow night we will have our launch party with prizes, because we're very generous at EY Maths. We'll start with prizes. So we'll be meeting up at 7:30 tomorrow night for our first live together. I can't wait. So let's have a look. Honestly, if you're a Pathway or an Impact member and you have missed all the notifications saying that Pathway Impact members and Team Impact, who are my groups that work together, you have already got it in your library. You get it for free. And I'm smiling, but inside I'm going, because I've emailed everybody. I've put it on as many groups as I can think of. I've tagged everyone, and I know we're all busy, but I don't know another way of telling anyone. So please, please, please. It's even on the website as well. When you go to the checkout, it says in the terms and conditions, please don't buy this if you're Pathway or Impact, because I've included it for free. All right. So it's in your library. Go and have a look. Anything else, anybody? Oh, I can't. Can I scroll? Oh, yes, I can. It wasn't letting me scroll there. Wish someone had taught me this, says Football News Show. That is my story. And there's things I'll tell you in the challenge. I'm going to run a session soon on maths anxiety. The consequences of not doing well at maths as an adult are more devastating than I can ever tell you. So watch out for that maths anxiety session I'm going to do as well. Okay, anybody, I'm going to hang on just for a couple more minutes, because obviously if you do want to sign up, you can change devices and do that at the same time. Anybody got any questions? Anybody got anything that says this isn't clear, or what's the catch? There is no catch. The reason why there's so many people on this call that are already paying to be in my membership is because what we do is so wonderful. So if there's anything that is worrying, tell me. So Katie, who is one of my Greater Impact members, says great new perspective. So what we talk about is wow bombs. We say, like, seriously, you hear the stuff and you go, makes so much sense. So let me just, while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, remember we had that, but we also, get rid of that bit, we also had the words. So you can go back to the beginning of this video and see. And I hope my analogy helped, because I think analogies are so helpful. They help us tell stories, don't they? Really interesting, says Fiona. Thank you, Fiona. Louise says, did you say that if you're a Pathway member, you automatically join the challenge? Do you know what, Pathway members? We need some serious talks, don't we? Number one, open and read your emails. Number two, if I tag you on the group, please don't ignore it. So I'm going to say my nicest possible way, Pathway members, because they're very new to me, Pathway members, it is already in your library for you. If you have 5 different logins, which some of you do, I might cut this bit off the video. No, I don't think anybody want to watch this. Some of you got 5 different logins or 3 different logins, and people go, oh, I can't find it. It's because it's in one of your other logins. So anybody who is not always opening their emails, I won't send you anything that isn't useful, I promise, but I need you to open them, otherwise you don't know what's going on. Yeah. Well, the Impact members will tell you I have to do some tough mummy love sometimes. We say, come on, big girl pants on, we're all busy. Take a look. Yeah, I'll look too, says Football News. Football News, I'm curious as to what your name is. Yeah, let's have a look. I think we're all right to stop now, aren't we? So you know where to find me, eymaths.co.uk. You know where to ask questions on that group. But as soon as you join, You will get it into your library, and all you do is log in at EY Maths. You'll get the information on how to do that. So easy. That's where your library will be held. And tomorrow you will be ready with us to start the challenge. And on Saturday morning, I will give you the very first video that I've made for you. You're going to love it. Okay. So how long will the videos be available in the library? If you're not Pathway or Impact, I've given you an extra week. So it will be, just let me grab my diary. I have written this up on the information, so you've got this as well. But it will be till March the 13th. And if you do decide to come into Pathways, the entry-level membership, you could come in for a month and you can leave again. We don't hold anybody in. So if you wanted to stay longer and get benefits and keep hold of the videos for longer, it's incredibly easy. And I'll tell you all about that during the challenge. So you can keep for as long as you like. Catriona says football news. Nice to meet you, Catriona. All right, I'm going to go. My husband's cooking some biryani and I'm looking forward to it, but it has been wonderful to have you all along. And if this sounds like you and you want more of this, you know where we are. All right. And we've got another challenge coming next term. We have 3 a year. So make sure you're on my email list on the website and you won't miss out. And you open your emails, of course. All right, you're very welcome. Lovely to see you, Liz, and everyone else. And Joe, go and look in your Pathway library. It's waiting in there for you. It's next to the Pathway bit. All right, take care, everyone.